other thing.
But I mean, in terms of like performance, yeah, England were third and second in the World Series in those 2 years, and that was probably at the root of nurturing and cultivating fabulous talent. I mean, obviously there was a certain Ollie Phillips that was nurtured and groomed at that point, but there were a lot of better players than me that came through in a bit of a golden era. You can list off the names of Danny Care, Matt Tate, Henry Paul. That's just a few like that just came through, and I remember playing with or seeing come through. Like, from your perspective, and people trying to put this into a business context as well, how did you nurture and identify that talent?
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, obviously, they were identified talent. And the important thing to realise and recognise, and this is the point I made to all of those types of players, there was two types of players in our programme. You have to understand that one needs the other. We had our 7 specialists who were the core. They were 7s. That was where they were world class. Yeah. Your Simon Amors, your Ben Gollins.
You're experts in the field.
They were experts, and I nurtured, and this was everything to them. So I invested a lot of time in making them the best versions of themselves within that field. Simon especially. So he understood that he was my general in the middle. And then you have these other guys, the Matthew Tates, the Danny Cares, the Ben Fodens, the Tom Vardells, the David Strettles, the Ollie Phillips, the Luke Narrowways. Yeah. But do you know what I mean? All of those, I think it was like 45 that came through that ended up playing for their country. But that was it. England Sevens was part of your development pathway. It wasn't everything, but we wanted to make sure that you had a positive experience, and everything that you learned here was transferable to take back to your club in your mission and your vision, which was to become an international 15s player. That was their ultimate aim. So
how did you, that's a fairly big vision. Yeah, and you need a lot of stakeholders to buy in, from clubs, the union, in order to understand that Danny Care is going to come and play for England in the 7s here, and then he will play for his club Harlequins, and then ultimately he will be groomed into this world-class England player. How did you sell that vision? How did you make sure that people understood the aim?
Because what I chunked it up is the fact that if you work back to what Danny Care or Matthew Tate needed to be an international player, they needed exposure on an international stage without the ramifications of a Six Nations 15s match. Mm-hmm. But they needed to experience what it is. They need to understand that the magnification of errors and what the implications of that can be if you don't apply yourself a way to be the best version of yourself. The 7s is the perfect vehicle for that. So the standards and the expectations we set for them, and we were consistent, were clear, and were high. But more importantly, I had to also convince the clubs that it's in your best interest to commit to this for the year. Now that at times was an education process based on historic track record, a little bit of leap of faith, so a little bit of a sales pitch from myself as well. And then more importantly, a conscious effort to be effective in our communicating and consistent in when we communicated, so that the club didn't feel like they were in the dark. The player didn't feel like he was in the dark. Every decision was player-centered, which meant that there was no hiding from the hard conversations, and there was no protecting, from my perspective, the DOR. If I felt the DOR was not doing the best thing in the best interest of the player, he was looking at more was important for his club. And as I've said to many DORs at the time, was if you are that reliant on a 21-year-old to win a Premiership match that's not really in your first team 23, then that's not my issue. That's an issue you need to address within your club. Now, they're quite inflammable conversations, and they're conversations that were had at the start of the season, and a commitment as we work through the entire season. I think the reality of that is that was the start point, right? And if you ever have to go to a contract or an agreement, then that's a last resort, because you've got to build it on consistency of relationship and consistency of action and consistency of communication. And they were three things that I was very, very cognizant of needing to do with the directors of rugby and the players, because the players become your biggest advocates as well, because then you've got to allow them and help them to grow as young men, to be able to hold and have those conversations with their DOR in their own right.
Yeah.
And that's tough for a 19, 20-year-old to, because he just wants to please whoever's going to pick him.
Yeah.